Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, I've got some more science fiction movie recommendations. Some of them are hidden gems, some of them are older films you might have forgotten about, some of them are classics that you might want to revisit and check out again. So let's get started. This first one started out as a TV series of sorts on MTV in the early 1990s. It ran from 1991 to 1995 as a part of MTV's Liquid Television show, which was mind-blowingly good. I remember watching Liquid Television, which was shown late at night on SBS, one of our national broadcasters here. And Liquid Television's different segments were mind-blowingly good. And this one, Aeon Flux, it was created by a Korean-American animator called Peter Chung, and it was mind-blowing. It was incredibly dynamic. It did a real lot of show rather than tell. The dialogue was minimal, but the graphic design and the look of it was something extraordinary. It hit that sweet spot in the late 80s and the early 90s when cyberpunk was a big thing, and the people who liked cyberpunk really liked it. In fact, I was one of them. I was a cyberpunk fan. I read all the books. I read Gibson and Sterling and Pat Cadigan and everything I could get that was cyberpunk. Some were better than others, but Aeon Flux, the series, was definitely in that sweet spot. She was a kind of lanky gymnastic assassin come dominatrix. She was part of the war between two surviving cities, one of which is called Monica and the other one's called this. She was a spy infiltrator going up against a guy called Trevor Goodchild, and not always succeeding. Sometimes she even died. In fact, in the early episodes, Aeon Flux died, but she was incredibly popular with the suits. And so Peter Chung and the team made her a regular part of it and actually named her after the title they had created for the series, Aeon Flux. And in 1995, Karen Kusama directed an interesting version of it starring Charlize Theron. This one, Aeon Flux, the movie, a lot different from the original source work, but still, I kind of like it. It's got a killer cast in it for a starter. It's got Charlize Theron playing Aeon Flux, of course. It's got Martin Sokas playing Trevor Goodchild. It's got Johnny Lee Miller in there as well. It's got Sophie Okonedo playing one of the other infiltrators, who's really groovy because she has hands instead of feet. It has Pete Postlethwaite and Frances McDormand in it, so the cast is killer. And it's pure kinetic action. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You don't engage with the characters very much, but it's got a groovy look and a groovy style. And I think this is the movie that really showed a lot of people that Charlize Theron could carry an action film on her own, which she's done many times since, of course, Mad Max Fury Road and Atomic Blonde. Yeah, it's got that early 2000s look about it, but I kind of like it. I don't think it's the best science fiction movie since Things to Come. I think it's a bit of fun. And sometimes you just want meathead action, you just want lots of sound and fury signifying nothing. And Aeon Flux covers that. And if you can also get the disc of the original MTV episodes of Aeon Flux, the animation on them is crisp. The show not tell aesthetic, where the graphics tell the story rather than the dialogue, is something extraordinary, and it was groundbreaking at the time, and it still has a lot to offer right now. So check that out as well. This one's based on an anime, a 1982 anime written by Katsuhiro Otomo, and it is one of the classics of anime. It is an incredibly influential film on creative people ever since it came out in 1988. It's cyberpunk, it's iconic, and it is Akira, which is truly a masterpiece of not only anime but science fiction cinema as well. It's got a bit of a backstory. In 1988, the entire city of Tokyo explodes and people think it's a nuclear blast, so it starts a world war. But in 2018, Neo Tokyo, the resurrected Tokyo, is going again, and two guys, one called Kaneda and the other one called Tetsuo, are rogue bikers traveling through the streets of Neo Tokyo. Only problem is, Tetsuo is an Esper. He's an incredibly powerful telekinetic talent who may well be as powerful as the legendary Akira, who was the person who created the explosion that destroyed Tokyo, even though everybody thought it was a nuke. And slowly, as Tetsuo's power develops, he becomes more and more of a threat, and his bestie Kaneda has to go up against him and try to stop him not only from destroying Tokyo, but from dying and from killing him. There's a kind of bromance between them. It's incredibly well done. It's, again, like the Aeon Flux anime. It's incredibly visually kinetic. Then, of course, you get the iconic moment is the Akira slide, where I'm not sure, I think it's Kaneda, it may well be Tetsuo, slides the bike he's riding sideways. And that has been copied and homaged tons of times by other things, right up until including Nope, Jordan Peele's most recent movie. In fact, at the moment, JB Hi-Fi had a buy one, get one free Blu-ray and 4K sale, which is kind of Christmas for Australian cinephiles. And one of the things I'm getting in that haul is the 4K of Akira, because I think it's that important a movie. It's a movie I really like. It's a movie, I'm kind of rediscovering my love of cyberpunk in a lot of ways. And this movie is part of that. And even though the tech isn't quite as slick as our modern technology, it's got a kind of retro credibility, which I like. And I like the idea of people going up against corporations. That's an idea that's becoming increasingly attractive to many of us these days. But Akira is definitely one that you should have on your list. And I haven't rewatched it for a while. But the moment the 4K comes in, my bum's on the seat, the remote's in my hand, and I'm going to enjoy it again. And of the movies I've got on order, and there aren't that many because I didn't have a lot of money, but of the movies I've got on order, that's the one I am really, really looking forward to. Now, while we're on the subject of Japan, Japan is a country which has a long history of disasters, both natural and man-made. And there's a very famous novel called Nihon Jinbotsu, Japan Sinks, which was incredibly popular at the time. And it has been made into several different movies, but this one from the 1990s, Japan Sinks, is one that I recommend. It's an epic movie. The special effects are good for their time. The characters matter. It's got that kind of sadness and that knowledge of history that really beds down the characters and their plight. Basically, the title says it all. Japan slowly is sinking into the ocean, and the population of Japan has to have a diaspora, and they have to travel to other lands. And like many other cultures, including Australian indigenous cultures, the connection Japanese people have to the land is quite psychologically and spiritually important to them. And the loss of that is something that's felt as a tragedy by everybody. And of course, it will be to pretty much anyone. But this one really works. It's got a big ensemble cast, as you can see from there. But Nihon Jinbotsu is worth checking out. It teaches us one of those things, kind of like the Otoko wa Sorayo movie series. It's one of those pieces of art that gives you a glimpse about how Japanese people see themselves. And when a country gives you that gift and shares the way they see the world and the way they see themselves, it's a gift that sometimes you can't ignore. And Nihon Jinbotsu is worth checking out. You really should find a copy of that, whether it's online or on physical media, and definitely check it out. It runs 134 minutes, so it's not a particularly short movie, but it's well worth finding and just experiencing. Of course, any movie as successful as that, and any intellectual property as successful as that, has got to have a pastiche. And this one came, I'm trying to find the year this one came out, but doesn't really matter. This is a parody of that. I think it came out in the early 2000s. The world sinks except Japan, which is basically every country in the world sinks, and all of the political leaders and all of the celebrities from all around the world end up doing shit jobs in Japan, the way first-generation migrants do in many, many cultures. It's a pastiche in there. You get a Schwarzenegger kind of thing. You get a George Bush kind of character. It's broadly satirical in that uniquely Japanese way, which I like, and that cover pretty much says it all as well. It's funny, even with the cultural barriers that are between me and enjoying a film that's specifically aimed at people with a Japanese cultural background. The jokes are still funny. The comedy is very broad. It's totally silly, but I think it may well be Japan dealing with a movie like Nihon Jinbotsu and exercising the blues that you get from watching that and from reading the original novel. And so satire is sometimes the pressure valve that you need to release the pressure of something as heavy and something as melancholy as Japan Sinks. Now, these two I think are on Tubi. Incredibly low budget, incredibly sharply written science fiction. One's a sequel to the other. This one stars some people you might know from other media like William Katz and John Billingsley and Amanda Peterson and Richard Reel. And it stars a man called David Lee Smith, who's got one of the most generic names for an actor, but he's a pretty good actor. It's based on a story by Jerome Bixby, Man from Earth, which is just basically a group of university professor friends get together for a weekend, and one of them is leaving town. And they kind of have some philosophical discussions about the nature of humanity, the nature of history, the nature of culture. And one of the characters, John Oldman, posits the idea of somebody who is thousands of years older and what they would experience and what they would learn and what they would be in the past. And as the conversation develops, it becomes fairly obvious that John Oldman is indeed someone from Neolithic times who has lived through the entirety of recorded human history and has been a crucial part of it at several different occasions. It's an incredibly great brain experiment, this one. It runs a tight 87 minutes, but it raises some really interesting issues and talks to belief systems that have developed over thousands of years and challenges them, but it doesn't challenge them in a mean-spirited way. So we've got that. Then we've got Man from Earth, Holocene, which is a sequel to it, filmed more than a decade later. This is all region, by the way, which is kind of cool. But this is a story of John Oldman, who is starting to age because of environmental pollution and the impacts of environmental pollution. And he, with some friends, has to kind of deal with that. It's setting up future sequels, which probably won't happen. But again, these two have a lot more ideas in them and a lot more challenging science fictional concepts in them than many, many more famous movies. And I like that. I like the low keyness of it, of them both. I like the ideas in them, and I like the revelation of who John Oldman is and exactly what he is, which develops in a natural way. The actors are all giving their A game to this small movie, which I think may have been crowdfunded, the first one. But either way, they are movies you can definitely enjoy. And if you're into the kind of ideas aspect of science fiction, which of course many of you are, rather than just the pew pew zoom zoom, you're going to enjoy these movies, and I recommend them highly. I don't think they're as good as they would have been with more resources put to them. But again, sometimes it's the idea that carries the movie and the passion of the actors, rather than the resources that are able to be put into the production. This one I just put in the last minute because I picked it up for $1. It's not great up science fiction at all, but it's a lot of fun, and it's got a lot of interesting people in it. And it was made by Robert Rodriguez, all three of them. Spy Kids 2, The Island of Lost Dreams, and Spy Kids 3, Game Over. Made by Robert Rodriguez, who uses the available computer technologies in an interesting way. They're kids' movies. They're a lot of fun. And they've got all sorts of people in it. Danny Trejo turns up as Uncle Machete. And you get Steve Buscemi turns up in there. You also get Ricardo Montalban. Lots and lots of really good actors who come in and do some nice work with it. Who else is in there? Holland Taylor's in there, Mike Judge, Christopher McDonald. Yeah, it's just a lot of fun to watch the Spy Kids movies. And the people who were watching these as kids are now adults, and they've got a nostalgic love of them. But I picked 3 movies on disc up for $1, and they're on individual discs. They didn't cheap out on it. But I kind of like the Spy Kids movies. I remember watching them when they first came out and enjoying them at a certain level. I like the visual imagination that's used in these movies. But they're all science fiction. Yes, the parents are spies and the kids end up getting a whole bunch of spy gadgets. But the ideas are there, and it's a lot of fun to just sit back and enjoy at a kind of kid level. Movies like these. Recommend them because they're fun. You can watch them with kids. You're not going to worry about boobs. You're not going to worry about too much violence. And they do have a great visual imagination. Pedro Almodovar, The Skin I Live In, with Antonio Banderas, This one is creepy body horror science fiction. A doctor called Robert Lagarde, played by Antonio Banderas, has kind of been living a funk since his wife died and was burned in a car accident. And he is a very gifted surgeon with a lot of skills who creates a replacement for his wife in a very creepy and unusual way. This is first level body horror. It's a strong sexual violence, sexual scenes, violence, and coarse language. If you haven't seen The Skin I Live In, it's worth checking out. I'm not going to tell you any more about it because that would be too much spoilers. But it's creepy as fuck, and Banderas is really good in it. And if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. It's disturbing. Isn't it odd that disturbing is entertaining for some of us? But that's the way things go. That's why David Cronenberg had a career. This one's a little kind of low-budget Japanese movie from early in the 21st century, which is put out by Chameleon Films. Summer Timemachine Blues is a bunch of students who are in a science fiction club in a school who end up going into different time loops. There they are there. And there are all sorts of little bits and detail, like where's the remote control for the air conditioner? It's hot in the summer, but nobody can find the remote control for the air conditioner. And why do things keep changing around, and what's happening there? And why do I see my friend over there when he's standing next to me? It's a lot of fun, and it plays with time loops in a really interesting way. And in a way that's kind of sweet. It plays almost like a live-action anime TV series in a way, but I kind of like it. The characters are engaging. The time travel aspect is done very well with very, very, very few special effects shots. But a really tight script, which watch it from the start and just pay attention to every little detail because there'll be a payoff of those details later in the movie. I like it a lot. It's sweet, it's fun. It's in a kind of special, kind of the Japanese equivalent of an Ealing comedy almost. And it worked for me. I bought it on spec. And I like it a lot, and you can pick it up from Chameleon Films. Been a lot of Japanese stuff on this video, so maybe it's time to do something else. Andrei Tarkovsky. Let's do a couple of Tarkovskys. Solaris. If you've seen the remake that Steven Soderbergh did with George Clooney, you've got to check out the original gangster Solaris. I prefer it to the George Clooney version, based on a novel by Stanislaw Lem, who was a great Polish science fiction author. Solaris is about a space station orbiting a planet called Solaris, which is a living planet, and a cosmonaut called Chris arrives to investigate a series of mysterious and bizarre occurrences among the crew. What he discovers a supernatural phenomena which cause repressed and haunting memories to take on physical form, including that of his late wife. Starts out on Earth and then goes to Solaris. It does a lot with very few special effects, but yeah, there's a lot of extras on this one. I picked up this copy in Scotland, oddly enough, in 2004, in Inverness at a Borders bookshop in Inverness. That shows you how long ago it was. I won a bet with Middle-Aged Geek Girl, and one of the movies I picked up because it was there. I won, and I was allowed to pick up 4 DVDs. So I picked up Solaris because I wasn't sure I could get a copy in Australia, which I couldn't at the time. But yeah, it blew my mind when I watched it. Steven Soderbergh's version less so. I think it's an honest movie, but I don't think it's as good as the original. And yeah, it's a masterpiece of science fiction, this one. And if you haven't seen it, you really should. I don't know whether Criterion have done a version of this yet, but if they haven't, they should have. And it's one you should watch. Then, of course, the other one to see of Tarkovsky's, the movie which may have killed him, because he got an infection from the poisonous, swampy places where they filmed this film. Based on a Strugatsky brothers story, Stalker. It builds its mood crazily well. It's about a stalker who helps people go into a zone where an alien artifact has fallen, and where the relationship between cause and effect and the nature of reality breaks down because of this alien artifact. And stalkers are people who can navigate through those strangenesses successfully. And so the stalker is sent in with these people to do an investigation, and things get deeply weird. This is a science fiction movie that does not reward people who don't pay close attention to it. The closer you look at it, the more you get from it. It's a masterpiece. I really should watch these two again soon. And it's just got such a fantastic feel about it. And the way it creates its world through locations mostly, but also through the way it's filmed and the way things happen and the way the characters interact, is subtle but very, very powerful. I like this one a lot. It's a movie that I had to watch 2 times to really thoroughly understand, and I think I'm going to watch it a 3rd time just to bed down that understanding and to really appreciate it. Movies like this I like better the older I get and the more experienced in watching movies I get. I get more out of them with repeat viewings because of that. Stalker and Solaris, I think, are ones that are going to really pay off for me for all of the hard work I've done sitting on my ass looking at screens. It's a really high recommend from me, as is Solaris. In fact, all of these ones are high recommends. They are great movies you're going to enjoy. So that's it for this time around. The Patreon subscribers at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies, you've still got time to put your name down for the draw to win the Blu-ray version of Weird, the Weird Al Yankovic story that Umbrella Entertainment gave me to give away. So there's still time to do that before the end of the month. And you can also support the channel otherwise by liking, subscribing, hitting the thumbs up, hitting the notification bell, and just leaving me a line. Tell me which of these movies you like, which ones you think I'm totally wrong about, and which other movies that aren't exactly the big ones would you recommend for a list like this. So on that note, look after yourselves. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch some science fiction movies that kind of slipped off your radar, but you really liked the first time you saw them. And I'll catch you next time.